Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you need to get up to speed quickly on, well, one of the most complex and definitely high stakes topics out there today, the geopolitics of oil, you're in the right place. Just think about it. The world is burning through over 100 million barrels of this stuff every single day. And the forces pulling the strings on production, trade, price, they're absolutely central if you want to grasp global economics, inflation, even political stability. So our mission today, let's cut through all the noise. We want to uncover the really critical shifts, the key data points that have basically redrawn the global oil map, especially over these incredibly chaotic last 14 months or so.
It really has been a period of, profound restructuring. What we're seeing is a clash, really, between two massive long-term global forces. You've got the immediate shockwave from Russia's reinvasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Remember, conflict didn't just start. It escalated dramatically from 2014. And then layered on top is this relentless pressure of the energy transition, the drive to tackle climate change. And these two things colliding, it's created this situation where pretty much every major government, every big industry is scrambling. They're having to completely rethink what energy security even means in this new kind of unpredictable world.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that, starting with just the sheer scale. It's kind of mind-blowing, over 100 million barrels a day. And here's the really tricky part, right? Despite everything we hear about EVs and renewables, that demand, it's not actually shrinking. It's still growing.
It is still expanding.
And a lot of that growth seems to be anchored in Asia, China, especially after reopening.
Yeah, the potential demand swing from Asia is huge. Just think, during lockdowns, people in China save something like $2.1 trillion.
Yeah.
Trillion. So if even a chunk of that gets spent on travel, what some analysts are calling revenge tourism, well, the pressure that puts on jet fuel, on diesel over the next year or two, that's going to push global oil prices up directly.
Okay. And who actually controls this flow? Because it's maybe not the big oil companies most people think of.
Exactly. That's a key point. When you look at the power dynamic, something like over 75% of the world's oil supply, it's controlled by state-owned oil companies, NOCs.
Like Saudi Aramco.
Precisely. Saudi Aramco, Venezuela's PDVSA, those types. The rest is the international oil companies, the IOCs, your Shells, your Exxons. But the vast majority, it means decisions are ultimately political, driven by national interest, not just, pure market forces.
Got it. So politically driven and the big players, production-wise.
Physically, the top three producers are the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Russia. On the other side, consumption, the U.S. still uses the most, over 20 million barrels a day.
For the number one consumer.
But, and this is important, China is now the biggest importer of crude oil. They overtook the U.S. there, and India is right behind them. They're really driving that global thirst we mentioned.
Right, which brings us neatly back to those geopolitical shocks, especially Russia and Ukraine. When the sanctions hit, the aim was to choke off Russia's oil money, but it wasn't that simple, was it?
Not at all. It was far more complex.
And here's the really fascinating bit for me. Russia's actual production, their exports, until pretty recently, they were surprisingly strong, like near pre-invasion levels, or even higher sometimes.
That's right. They didn't really lose production volume overall. What they did was completely reroute it. They basically drew a whole new map for their oil trade almost overnight.
How? Who started buying it?
Well, the key was the massive discount Russia was offering. Sometimes, $20, even $30 a barrel cheaper than other crudes.
Okay, that's a big discount.
Huge. Made it irresistible for buyers looking for cheap energy. Think Turkey, Singapore, China, India especially. They became the big new customers.
And how did they physically move all that oil?
Two main ways. They maxed out their pipelines, like the big East Siberian one going straight to China.
Yeah.
And the other thing was they deployed this, what people call a shatter fleet of tankers.
Shatter tankers. Sounds shady. What does that actually mean? What are the real-world consequences?
It's a really crucial technical point, and the consequences are potentially vast. We're talking about an aging fleet of ships, often operating outside normal maritime law, maybe uninsured, lacking the usual safety checks.
Right.
So while they keep Russian oil flowing, they introduce enormous environmental risks. Imagine if one of these tankers, maybe poorly maintained, has an accident, a major spill. The cleanup would be catastrophic, and good luck figuring out who pays for it. There's often no clear mechanism.
That adds a whole layer of systemic risk, makes the whole market feel quite fragile.
And that fragility, was that sort of exploited by OPEC Plus with their recent production cut? Let's talk about that.
Yes, absolutely. OPEC Plus, remember that includes non-OPEC countries like Russia, Kazakhstan, Mexico. they announced a pretty big cut, 1.2 million barrels a day taken off the market. And the timing was weird, wasn't it? The market was already tight, not flooded with oil.
Exactly. That's what made it so significant. It wasn't a reaction to low prices because of excess supply. It was a cut into an already tight market.
But hang on, most big economies are fighting inflation. Why would the producers deliberately cut supply then? Seems counterintuitive.
Well, that's the geopolitical calculus, isn't it?
Yeah.
The decision immediately shot oil prices back up over $80 a barrel. And the consequence, it's a massive instant transfer of wealth from oil consumers to oil producers.
Right.
It fuels inflation in places struggling already, and it gives producers like Saudi Arabia and Russia a bigger financial cushion, protects their revenues against any potential global slowdown. It was, you could say, preemptive.
And it really seemed to highlight that growing tension between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. The U.S. sounded genuinely surprised, even disappointed.
They were, very publicly. It showed how much that old oil for security deal, the one set up after World War II, has frayed.
But if the U.S. shale boom means America isn't as physically dependent on Saudi oil imports anymore, why get so upset? Doesn't that suggest the U.S. still needs Saudi Arabia to, manage the market?
Absolutely. That's the key distinction. The U.S. relies less on Saudi Arabia for physical supply for itself, sure, but it still relies heavily on Saudi Arabia for energy policy, for being that country with spare capacity, the one that could, historically, step in to stabilize things. So when Saudi Arabia, who really leads OPEC decisions, basically adopted this non-aligned stance on Russia-Ukraine, and clearly prioritized its own revenue over U.S. diplomatic asks, it signaled a fundamental change. The relationship looks much more transactional now, driven by immediate market conditions, not old security pacts.
Okay, that makes sense. Speaking of conflicting priorities, this brings us to the energy transition paradox. How is global demand still so resilient, even growing, when we've got things like the Paris Agreement pushing the other way?
Yeah, it creates huge uncertainty for any long-term planning, especially around this idea of peak oil demand. When will it actually happen?
Right, nobody seems to agree.
Exactly. You get some forecasts, like from BP maybe, saying peak demand could hit before 2030, banking on really fast EV adoption. Others say no, it's much later, maybe post-2035. And this disagreement, this contradiction, it means companies are planning massive investments. Today, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars, based on forecasts that could be completely wrong. That's a major risk.
And part of that resilience is because oil isn't just fuel for cars and planes, is it? It's used in loads of other stuff.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's crucial to understand. Its resilience comes because it's so deeply embedded across the economy in non-fuel uses. It's not just transport. Oil is critical for petrochemicals, think plastics, cosmetics, medical kit, all sorts. And vitally for making fertilizer, which, underpins the entire global food system.
Wow.
If you need proof of how essential it is, just look back at the peak of the COVID lockdowns. Global travel basically stopped, right?
Ground to a halt.
Even then, the total drop in daily oil demand was actually under 10 million barrels. The world still needed the other 90 million barrels every day for everything else that keeps society functioning.
So to square that circle, needing the oil but facing climate goals, we're seeing some producers, particularly Saudi Arabia, talking about things like low-emission oil. What's that about?
Yeah, that refers to efforts to bolt on technologies like carbon capture and storage, CCS, onto the production process itself.
Okay.
The idea is you capture the CO2 released when you're actually extracting the crude. So the barrel itself has a lower carbon footprint at that point. It allows producers to market their oil as cleaner, maybe, to buyers worried about emissions.
But it doesn't help with the emissions when I burn the petrol in my car later.
Exactly. It doesn't address the end-use combustion emissions. It's about cleaning up the production side.
Got it. This complexity plays out in Europe too, right? Russia using gas as a weapon really forced Europe's hand on speeding up the energy transition.
Absolutely. That energy security crisis across Europe was a massive accelerator for renewables. But even trying to define what counts as green energy caused, political fights.
Ah, yes, the EU green taxonomy. That got messy.
It was a perfect example of really difficult political compromises. The aim was to classify sustainable investments. But in the end, the EU labeled both nuclear power, which was a big win for France, needing that stable non-weather power and natural gas, a win for Germany, needing a bridge fuel away from coal as green under certain conditions.
Labeling natural gas a fossil fuel as green.
Right. It kind of undercuts the original goal of phasing out all fossil fuels quickly. It just shows the huge policy trade-offs you face when immediate energy security becomes the absolute top priority, maybe even over pure climate goals in the short term.
Okay, shifting gears to global hotspots. Venezuela. It feels like this massive, untapped potential just sitting there.
It's a huge paradox. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves. On paper, they could jump in, ease global supply tightness, maybe add 2 million barrels a day or even more.
So what's stopping them?
Well, it's layers of problems. First, years of political chaos, sanctions, sheer mismanagement. It means their production capacity is crippled, the infrastructure is old, broken, needs billions in foreign investment just to get working properly again.
Okay, so political and investment issues.
And then there's a technical and environmental challenge. Most Venezuelan oil is what's called very heavy crude.
Why is heavy oil a bigger problem now in this sort of carbon-focused market?
Heavy oil is just denser, more viscous. It takes a lot more energy to get it out of the ground, to transport it, and critically, to refine it into useful things like gasoline or diesel compared to lighter oils.
Ah, so more energy means more emissions.
Exactly. More emissions generated just in the process of producing the final fuel. That higher carbon intensity makes it much less attractive to big international buyers, to financiers who are all under pressure to clean up their own supply chains. So Venezuela has the oil, yes, but getting those high carbon barrels back into a net zero focused world, that's a real hurdle.
And that links to another difficult issue, doesn't it? The African equity challenge. You mentioned future demand growth is expected from Asia and Africa, but countries like Nigeria needing capital for energy infrastructure, they're facing pushback.
That's right. You have Western governments, major financial institutions increasingly tightening the rules, often refusing to fund new fossil fuel projects in Africa or other parts of the developing world, citing climate commitments.
But that creates a fairness issue.
It creates a massive equity issue. I mean, developed nations built their wealth using fossil fuels, achieve universal energy access. Now, arguably, they're pulling up the ladder, blocking developing nations from accessing the capital they need for their own growth, for basic infrastructure. Especially when, many African nations still don't have reliable energy for everyone. It feels like hypocrisy to many, and it definitely fuels resentment, increases instability risks too.
That is a really complex ethical and economic tightrope for the future. Okay, to kind of pull all this together, let's maybe synthesize. What are the top, say, 3 big geopolitical challenges you see defining the oil market over the next 5-10 years?
Okay, top 3 risks. First, I'd say the permanently altered and right now worsening tensions between Saudi Arabia and the United States. That lack of alignment removes the traditional market stabilizer we used to rely on.
Okay, U.S.-Saudi friction, number 1.
Second, the ongoing sort of hot war, Cold War dynamics, especially U.S.-China relations. Energy security, supply chains, access to tech that's increasingly part of their competition.
Right, U.S.-China.
And third, maybe the most immediate risk. It's a combination of tightening supply because of underinvestment, because of these geopolitical production cuts colliding with unreduced, resilient demand.
Supply down, demand stable, or up.
Exactly. And that combination points pretty directly towards sustained high energy prices, which means persistent global inflation and real pain for fragile economies, the ones that depend on affordable energy just to keep the lights on and society stable.
So we've taken a deep dive today. We've looked at that incredible resilience of demand, the total redrawing of Russia's trade map with those shadow tankers, and this really profound power shift highlighted by the OPEC plus cuts. It's clear this essential volatile commodity, its politics are just absolutely central to where the global economy heads next.
And maybe here's a final thought for you to chew on. The really critical geopolitical challenge now for policymakers everywhere is making absolutely sure our current energy systems are strong enough, resilient enough, before we aggressively pull supply out in the name of the energy transition. We had to be really careful not to weaken the existing system, the pipelines, the supply lines we rely on today before the new, cleaner systems are genuinely ready, fully capable of meeting global needs. So, given all the complexity we've discussed, Venezuelan heavy oil, the African equity dilemma, everything else, how can leaders actually guarantee, adequate access to energy for everyone, especially vulnerable people, vulnerable industries, without wrecking the climate transition, but also without destabilizing everything by moving too fast, getting that balance right? That feels like the defining challenge for the next decade.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.